Appreciative inquiry is a conversational process, 2 words, appreciative and inquiry. Inquiry being really important. It's a kind of practical day-to-day research in which we're asking questions and we're curious and we're open to learning. And then appreciative says, what is it that we want to learn about? And the key for me is I want to learn what gives life to people, groups, large communities when they're at their best.
Hello and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Diana Whitney as we take a communication perspective on appreciative inquiry and positive change. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So, whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Diana Whitney. Dr. Whitney is a global social entrepreneur. She's the founder of Corporation for Positive Change, co-founder of the Taos Institute, and a founding advisor to the United Religions Initiative. Diana has authored many books, which you can check out at the link I've included in the show notes. Her award-winning books on appreciative leadership and appreciative inquiry, the revolutionary process she helped to develop, along with David Cooper-Ryder, have been translated into over a dozen languages and are used as textbooks in business schools, universities, and corporate learning centers around the world. Diana consults with executives and their team in support of strategic planning and organization development, organization culture creation and transformation, and leadership capacity building. Diana also serves as distinguished consulting faculty with Saybrook University and as a Ph.D. advisor with the Taos Institute. She's expert faculty for the NCR Picker Patient Centered Care Institute and a fellow of the World Business Academy. I'm so excited to share this conversation with Diana today as we dive into appreciative inquiry. Like I said at the top, this may or may not be something you're familiar with, but it's a really wonderful thing for all of us to continue learning about. And Diana has such great perspective and such wonderful stories to share. So let's just dive right in and begin the conversation with Diana. Hi, Diana. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Hi, Abbie. I am thrilled to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm so glad that you accepted the invitation. To start us off, I want to ask the question I always ask. How are we arriving? I'll answer it too, but would you like to start for us?
Oh, I am arriving on a sunny day in Denver, which is delightful. Last week we were at 5 degrees. This week we're at 55. I'm also arriving with an offer on the table for my house in North Carolina because I've just moved here a few months ago. So that's got me a little bit, on alert, so to speak. But my realtor knows I'm on this call with you, just having a great conversation, not to disturb me.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, that's exciting. I feel that I am arriving with a lot of excitement to learn from you.
Oh,
I know we're going to get into conversations around appreciative inquiry, which is something I just know very little about, and related to that change, which is something I feel so curious about. As a student beginning to study communication, I felt that the theories and the practices, the tools that I was learning about felt really powerful, but it was so much theory rather than the practice of it. And so I'm, getting more and more into the practice side of it. And that's what I'm really curious about. So I think that's maybe some stories that you'll be able to offer us insight into how change can happen. So that's what I'm really looking forward to today, and the kind of specific excitement that I'm arriving with.
That's great because it raises a question for me that I hope we can talk about at some point today. And that is, what do we mean by change?
Hmm.
Right? We hold it up as this sort of magical end result. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit when we get going.
Great, great. I'll make a note. We'll make sure we cover that. To start, though, can you please introduce yourself? And I like to acknowledge we're not going to be able to get to hear all the stories of what makes Diana Diana today, but I'll let you kind of pick and choose. What do you want us to know about you as we go into this conversation today? What feels important that we know?
Well, I think there are a few things. One is that my field is and has been communication, that from my early days in college to my Ph.D. and through all of my work, my field has been communication, from interpersonal communication. I was a debater, argumentation and debate, and then landing in the field of organizational development and change as a communication scholar.
Mhm.
So that's number one. Number two, I am a co founder of the Taos Institute, which is focused on social constructionism. So, along with communication, that's another unique perspective that I bring. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go through our
Yes.
conversation. And number three, I am a founder of an international consulting group called Corporation for Positive Change. I'm no longer running that business, but for, I guess, close to 40 years, I've been an international consultant. With my focus is on large scale change, which means I don't look at the person or the individual as the focus of my work. I look at the system, the systemic dynamics, which are relational, they're
Hmm.
conversational, and they're patterns of communication. And that's the point of intervention and transformation that I work with. And I have worked with hospital systems, educational systems, financial systems, large organizations of hundreds and thousands of people that spread across geographies.
Hmm.
And what else? I have on occasion called myself pathologically creative. And that just shows up both in helping my clients come up with fresh and innovative ideas, but also I love painting and making things. And it's just an orientation of my life. So that's a little bit about me.
That's a great place to start. Not everybody that comes on the podcast has a communication background. In fact, most people don't. So I love to get to have guests that have a communication background as well. And I'm always so curious to know, what was it that got you into studying communication in the first place, and what keeps you interested in communication now?
Okay, those are great questions. I got into it initially thinking that I wanted to go to law school. And so communication, I wasn't so interested in the political science thing. I was more interested in what were the practices that were involved in legal settings. Fortunately, I do say fortunately, I didn't end up going to law school. I ended up moving to my PhD. But what keeps me interested in communication now? I think you probably have the same perspective that there's old models of communication that are very individualized, that
Mhm.
say, I as a communicator have to put this message together in a really good package, because it's like I'm going to throw it to you and you have to catch it. And we're two
Mhm.
individuals. And this idea of information is something almost objective that we pass along. And if I do a good job, you're going to get the idea exactly as I sent it. Well, more recently, and particularly from a social constructionist point of view, we say that's not exactly how communication works.
Mhm.
Communication is much more of a conversation in which we co create meaning. And that's what holds my attention. How is it that we, in our many different relationships and our many different arenas of action, how do we make meaning? And
Mhm.
how do we make meaning in a coordinated way with other people that's coherent? So, communication really, for me, is at the heart of all that's going on in the world. It's our relationships, it's our language, it's the questions we ask, and it's the meaning we make together that endures.
Yeah, that's really well said, and I think helps to really break down and articulate why I love communication for a lot of the same reasons that you just said, and a purpose behind this podcast. A lot of people on the podcast don't have a communication background, and that's really the point of that. Communication is everywhere and it's everything. And so if you're using a communication perspective, you're going to learn, you could apply a communication perspective to any area and learn something
Yes.
new.
Yes.
I'm curious about what you said when you're introducing yourself too, that, you reference you kind of started in the world of interpersonal communication, but now you're in this like large systems change. So I'm curious about what's this intersection, or how do you apply this interpersonal communication background when, like you're saying, you're not thinking about it on an individual level, you're thinking about it on a system level.
Well, I think what you've really done there is invite me to talk about appreciative inquiry.
Please, yes.
Which is the work that I'm most known about and have written a lot of books. What we know in organizations is that there become, just like in families, just like in couples and relationships, there become habitual ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And those habits are practices, and they're woven into everything. So when I was in graduate school, I studied the systemic family therapist, Václavic, Haley, Bateson. And one of the things that stood out for me there was, if there's an imbalance in the system, it may show up in one person.
Mm-hmm.
One member of a family might have an eating disorder. But when that person gets healed, then that disturbance shows up somewhere else, right? Another member of the family may start being really angry. And what that was showing me is that it's not the people, it's that there's something in the communication patterns. And so I began working initially with mergers and integration in large companies, pharmaceutical companies, actually. And what I found was, when we brought people together and let them talk about what they were doing that was successful, a bit of the rationale for why they were doing it, that other people began to adopt those habits, that people tended to seek the successful ways of doing things. But so often we don't know them because we've been educated to look for the problem. We've been educated to do a diagnosis of what's wrong and try to fix it. So we are a world of fixers, not a world of creators. And it just didn't work, because I saw people trying to fix things that were no longer relevant, because the world had changed, the context around them had changed. And so fixing a particular technology missed the point that there was a new technology out there. So I was helping people have dialogue to look at possibilities. Then we got into these discussions, and I say you've interviewed Sheila McNamee, Ken, Mary Gergen, dear friend who has passed. And we started talking about the Taos Institute. We talked about it before we had a name for it. So that's also something to be said for how innovation occurs. People get together, they're in conversation, they get good ideas, and then they name it. And in the course of those conversations, I was introduced to David Cooperrider and Suresh Srivastava, who were kind of in the early stages of this idea of appreciative inquiry. And I say the idea because it was conceptual, it was at the university, and they had some practice, but not a lot of practice yet. So David and I began working together, and My work as a consultant in corporations and David's work at the university with some other work began to give form to what has become known as appreciative inquiry. An appreciative inquiry is a conversational process, 2 words, appreciative and inquiry. Inquiry being really important. It's a kind of practical, day-to-day research in which we're asking questions and we're curious and we're open to learning. It's like you put it together today. We're in conversation and we're open to learning with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then appreciative says, what is it that we want to learn about? And the key for me is that I want to learn what gives life to people, groups, large communities when they're at their best. What gives life? So some people talk about appreciative inquiry as positive. Some people talk about it as strength-based. I really personally like the notion of appreciative inquiry is the study, the curiosity of what gives life to people when they're at their best, which means we're looking for what works well. We're looking for images of the future that are hopeful and compelling to people. And we're looking for what people value most because we want to study what people value as a way of helping them bring it to life. So my work has been in giving form to appreciative inquiry, developing practices, often in partnership with my clients, and using it to help people achieve their goals, both business and people oriented.
That feels like a really helpful place to start. And I'm wondering if you could add to that a story, maybe an example of an experience you've had with a client or in a personal situation of applying appreciative inquiry to say, what does that actually look like in practice?
I have, as you said, many, many stories. But let me share the one that's just most recent, within the past couple of years, because working with whole organizations, it's not like I have 5 stories going on at the same time. So I got an email a few years back that I really almost deleted as spam. And the subject line was, I want to hire you. And I thought, well, it doesn't hurt my computer to open it. What will hurt is if I respond or do anything. So sure enough, the email said, I'm a new CEO of a credit union. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've just learned that you're down the road in Chapel Hill, where I used to live. And I've been studying appreciative inquiry. I've read a lot of your books and I need help. So we had a phone call. The initial help was, I have 2 boards of directors. The organization is going to come together as one eventually, and I need a meeting of all those boards, a 2-day meeting, and I'd like you to help design it using appreciative inquiry and facilitate it. Okay, I can do that. So we had a 2-day meeting, and the meeting focused on appreciative inquiry questions were leadership at their best. What was it that attracted them to being on this volunteer board? What stories do they have of leadership at its best? What are their hopes and dreams for their organization as they come together? And what ideas do they have for how to make that happen? So they interviewed each other, and the interviews are often enlightening for people. They come back and they go, wow, I really got to know the person. So many good ideas, things I didn't think about. So the appreciative interviews themselves are very meaningful in helping people to see the relational realities that already exist. that they often ignore. So we did interviews, and then we had a series of dialogues over the 2 days. And at the end of that time, they made a series of decisions that one of the board members at the end said, this was historic.
Mm-hmm.
And what they decided, which I can now easily talk about, is to separate their credit union from a larger credit union that they had been part of for many years. So they decided to become independent. They decided to become one organization, and they would continue serving the local government in North Carolina. Well, that was fabulous. My client said, great, Appreciative Inquiry did it. Your facilitation skills were helpful. I said, thank you. And he said, no, we can't stop there. We now have to engage our employees.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have an organization of about 250 people. We're coming out of the pandemic. So there are people who've been hired during the pandemic who've never gone in the office,
Mm-hmm.
who don't really know their colleagues very well. So then I put together a team of people to work with me, and we designed a 2-day Appreciative Inquiry Summit. And again, it was to bring all of these 250 people together, which meant we had to figure out, how does the business continue while we bring people off-site for 2 days? What do we want to do the evening between the 2 days to let people really kind of socially connect? And it turns out that one of the staff members was in a very well-known local band, and the band agreed to play, and they had a party. But we had 2 days of meaningful conversation, again, about what are the strengths of our organization when we're doing things well. What is it that we're doing? And everything you hear is we,
Mm-hmm.
and focused on the organization. And now, can you imagine that we become an independent organization? What does that mean? And so now we've invited 200, and there were about 220 people in the room, staff members, to talk about what does it mean. And one of my favorite, of course, there were a lot of business things in terms of credit cards and mortgages and all the basics of the business. But one of my favorite lines was, one person said, well, our group thinks it means like we've been living in our parents' basement apartment, and now we're going to get our own apartment. And so that group put out a metaphor that everybody sort of applauded. And, that was fabulous. Well, now we've got employees understanding, not 100% on board, but understanding the direction. And that could be followed up with a series of town meetings, just a number of things continued, annual meetings. But now we've got members all across the state of North Carolina. This is a credit union that serves local governments, local government people, fire departments, state governments, libraries, trash collectors, all of the people who are in government service. So we designed a 1-day Appreciative Inquiry process and went out to 5 cities across the state and invited, I think there are about 100, 125 people in each of those meetings, again, to get their input, not just about the organization, but about their communities and what their communities needed, because this new organization was going to be serving those communities. And so that process took us quite a while and is continuing with meetings that are called community connections. So that gives you an idea of how we roll out conversations through large numbers of people, always with an appreciative focus and a business focus. It's not questions like, what will make you happy? That's not what we're talking about when we talk about Appreciative Inquiry. We're talking about this business is about to separate from a larger entity. We're going to be independent. What does that mean in terms of the way we do our business, the way we relate to our clients, our members, how we relate to each other? And so the organizational process has to be about the context and multiple dynamics of the business. I feel like that's a long story, but it's a good story.
It's a great story. I think it needs to, I wanted to encompass the whole of that experience, so that's really meaningful, I think. And it just feels so crucial to me to give people the tools to allow them to look at their styles of communicating, the quality of their communicating, and be reminded that they have choices in how they design or how they engage. A story that you've made me think of as you were sharing your story is that recently I got to travel to Arizona to attend the Arizona State Gifted Conference for gifted educators, because the CMM Institute has some resources. Cosmo Kids and Cosmo Tweens are conversational activities helping kids to understand the choices they have to act into and create their social worlds. And we had a teacher who's been a part of developing Cosmo Kids. She's been on this podcast, Amy McDonald. She presented for us, and then I got to stand at the table and give away boxes, which was so fun. And she, to the teachers that were in her presentation, said, think of when you talk to your kids, how much of what you say is a directive. Clean your room, go do this, don't do that. And she said, that doesn't count. That doesn't actually count as conversation. And I was like, that is such a great way to put it, and such a great thing to draw people's attention to, because that is bringing something that's maybe kind of unconscious. You're not reflecting on the way that you're communicating with your kid, which is maybe 99% telling them what to do. It's not conversation. And this was a 2-day conference. And someone came back to me on the second day, someone that, must have been local because they went home to their kids that night. They came back and said, I used these activities with my kid last night. I learned so much from them. And that's other feedback we've gotten from other teachers since this conference, that they learn so much by inviting kids into the conversation, because then you hear from the kids. It's not about the teacher saying, okay, here's a scenario. Here's 3 different ways we might respond to it. It's, what do you think are 3 different ways we might respond to it? And then what might happen after each of those choices that we make? What might we be creating here? And so that is been an example that's really been sticking with me recently, because again, it's, just recent in my life, but it's been so front of mind to be like, yes, this matters so much, and it can make such a significant change.
I love that. I might borrow that.
Please.
Directives are not conversations.
Yes.
Because it's part of that narrative that I talked about earlier about we're all trying to fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so,
or control it.
And control. If I'm giving directives, I am in no way bringing out the best of other people. Like you said, if I say, we need 3 ideas here so that we can have some conversation about them, what do you think are the 3 ideas? Now, the thing I would add to that, I just love it. Directives are not conversations. They're part of the problem-solving mindset.
Yeah.
They really are. One of the things that I have learned over many, many years is if I ask people to give me a list of things, it generally leads to divisiveness. So if I say to a group, what do you think are the 10 criteria of a great team? They'll give me their ideas. And the next thing I know, they're arguing about which is number 1, what should be on the list of 10. But if instead I say, all right, we've all been part of a lot of teams in our lives. Could even call a family a team. But tell me a story about a time when you've been part of a great team, or you can think of a great team. It might be your favorite sports team. Tell me this story, what makes that team great? And so inviting people into narrative, and then the question of what can we learn from those stories, gives us a much more relationally coordinated and coherent way of talking about teams,
Mm-hmm.
whereas asking for lists tends to pull people apart. I'm curious what your experience with that is.
Yeah, to me, the difference there is an emphasis on outcome versus the process. And I think that's, again, so important, especially, you and I being located in the United States. I think we live in a big productivity culture that is very obsessed with efficiency. And so it's more interested in where'd you get, not really how did you get there. So in the way that you just reframed that, it's changing the conversation to say, where did you get? And say, I'm much more curious about how you got there. I'm much more curious about the story. And that's been big for me because I think that it's been a learning curve for me to really lean into kind of the being where you're at, acknowledging that you are maybe mid story or mid process, because I've, kind of internalized these cultural things that make me want to just have all the answers. So I'm thinking about leadership here and leadership positions I was in, in high school. I did show choir. You said you were in debate. I was on the speech team and I was a
Right?
captain for there. And I loved being in these leadership positions. But as I look back, I see how I understood leadership to be me needing to have all the answers and not being in conversation with the teams that I was a part of in this way that you're talking about, doing the kind of not relational, not conversational thing, but the directional thing.
I love that. And it ties into that question I wanted to talk about earlier.
Yeah.
What do we mean by change?
Yeah.
And I think that, again, that the notion of change can be an end result or it can be a process.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
with my work in large scale organizations, never, ever are all the people in the same place at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And my goal is not to get everybody there. It's to help change the narrative, begin a process that will change the narrative. I often say, I'm not trying to change people because I don't want anybody to try to change me.
Yeah, right.
But I do want to help people change their narratives so that they are more life affirming
Mm-hmm.
and more aligned with their values and goals. So this notion of change, it's what is our target of change? And for me, it's the narrative, it's the stories we tell.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our clients years ago, Tom White, who was the president of then GTE, now Verizon,
Mm-hmm.
said, our organizational culture is the stories we tell about ourselves, and then we forget they're just stories.
Yeah.
Right? We think that's our reality, and we expect other people to live into it instead of having agency to create our own stories.
Mm.
So we're targeting the stories, the narratives, and we're understanding, at least in my point of view, that people are always at different places in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Right? People are on a learning curve. Organizations at their best are a learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And if we change a few steps along the way, then people have new ways of learning. So if we were to take a snapshot of my wonderful favorite credit union right now, we'd see that at the annual meeting in March, which is just a couple weeks away, the name change will be finalized and there'll be just one. There is now one legal credit union. There are no longer two. That in June, the separation from the other organization is finalized. A lot of people in the other organization still don't believe it. So they're telling members, no, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Right? There are a small number of people in the organization who themselves don't believe it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we've got people on that whole spectrum of the early innovators, the ones who are leading the way.
Mm-hmm.
The bulk of the organization is there. But there are people literally all over the map. It's just how life is.
Yeah.
right? That's the reality. And like you said, learning to accept what is really important. And giving people more life-affirming alternatives to move toward, as opposed to trying to push them. And so any organization is always a wide spectrum of possibilities and narratives.
Mm.
And our goal is to help the narratives align with the business objectives, the people objectives. In this case, my client is absolutely committed to people, prosperity, and planet. I just unquestionably.
Yeah.
So making sure that everything aligns to those three values is essential.
Yeah, okay, you're getting me thinking, because I really hold on to this language that, is from the world of communication, of pluralistic truths, and the idea that many stories can coexist at once. I think that's a really beautiful thing. But now I'm curious, hearing you talk in the story that you've just told, when you are in an organization and you do need people to be on the same page to some extent to find some coherence in the stories, how do you maybe find balance between these two things, that many stories can be true at once, and also sometimes we need you to get on the same page?
It's kind of like your mama saying, you may not want to go to school today, but you're going.
Yeah.
So look, in an organizational process like I've described, there's also a very significant marketing and communication process going on that is engaged in crafting messages and narratives that are going out throughout the organization, internal communication and external communication, radio, TV, media, social media. So all of that is going on because one of the little bits of communication research, I can't even say it's theory, but the notion that it's important to communicate the same message through multiple channels over time. Because even if I believe something is a good idea, I integrate it when I hear it come. Like Sheila recommended me to you. Well, I talked to Sheila. She recommended you to me.
Right.
So I meet you. That's one point. I hear from Sheila. That's another point. I go online, see some of your other podcasts. So it's all of the multiple ways of communication that help us to confirm a narrative.
Yeah.
Go forward with a narrative. And so in a large system, one has to be really aware of that. Years and years and years ago, when I was a young consultant, it's coincidental that it was a banking system. The CEO said, I feed the grapevine. I said, what do you mean? He goes, people gossip. The grapevine is probably our clearest, most believable form of communication. So I put messages out. So, on one hand you laugh, and on the other hand you go, that was a wise communication strategy, right?
Again, I just love the language. I want to get into what do you mean? I don't want to take for granted we're making the same meaning. You make the distinction between, you reference the Corporation for Positive Change. You use this language of positive change. So I'm curious what the distinction you're making is between using just the language of change versus saying positive change.
Wow, that's a great question. For me, my work is very value-based. So I would say to you, positive change occurs when people have voice. I could create change by talking to an executive and helping them push something through their organization. That's not positive to me. Yeah. Positive is when people who don't normally have a say have voice. Positive is when it helps people understand what they care about and make choices about whether the organization is the right place for them, given their own personal values and the direction of the business. Positive change just has so much to do with collaboration, letting people come together and talk to one another. And I mean, create a world that works for them. One of my publishers, Barrett Kohler, that's a tagline, a world that works for all. And so it's not positive change. I wouldn't take a project. People wouldn't hire me if they want me to be an arm of their authoritarianism, right? It's positive when people are in the consideration. Yeah. So you can imagine the world is not the way I wish it could be right about now.
Yeah, well, that's a part of what I was thinking about. What prompted that question is that I hear the word change, and there is a part of me that immediately goes to a kind of evolution or progress, that it is naturally positive change, but that is not necessarily true. So it is an important distinction to make, that things have been changing a lot recently, but I wouldn't call it positive change in a lot of ways. So that's, yeah, it feels like a very important distinction to make. As you talk about bringing people into the conversation, I do want to go back to this idea of leadership and what it looks like to combine the values of appreciative inquiry, or the practice of appreciative inquiry, with something like leadership, which I think we can conceptualize as, so, okay, here's one person, here's this clear hierarchy, you're above others, you're guiding others, you're leading others, whatever language you would apply to that. What does an appreciative kind of leadership look like?
Well, it just so happens I've written a book about that.
Tell us.
And it's really funny because now I will probably not be able to even remember. But appreciative leadership is implicitly a relational process,
right?
That brings out the best of people, so that they can go forward together, creating worlds that are ideal in their images, creating positive images. And we talk about 5 strategies. Of course, one of them is inquiry. Appreciative leadership really focuses not on being directive, but on asking good, juicy questions, right? Second, we talk about illumination, which is shining the light on the best of people, bringing out the best. Another organization recently, a client that I coach, has made some dramatic changes in the executive team, took one person away from being a manager and put that person in a role that was more of a strategy thinking, integration with the outside. That person is thriving. The department that person was taken from is thriving. And so that notion of understanding and bringing out the best of people, not just putting them in roles because it's a higher position and you want to move that person up. So that notion of illumination. Another one is integrity. And that's one of the most precious words in our language, because integrity derives from the notion of integral, which is wholeness.
Yeah.
It means all. And integral and wholeness comes from the derivation of healing. And so to be in integrity is to be healing the whole. And so for leadership to be in integrity, it's not just about honesty and truth. I mean, all that's really important, but it's also about really focusing on the whole and knowing that there is a whole of integrated conversations, both within and beyond the organization. The fourth one, or another one, is inclusion. And so that really gets at asking the question, who else needs to be in this conversation, right? How do we include all the people whose future it is? So we're not doing things to people, we're really with them. And, that's the work of John Schotter, Taos Institute Associates. He talked about withness, and it's a very important notion. So inclusion is very important. And then the final one is inspiration, really putting together the work that inspires people and wants them to be part of and make things happen together. Because that's what leadership is about. It's about helping people make things happen together.
That's good. I appreciate you giving us a taste of that. But yeah, I'll make sure I include a link to your book so people can find it easily. I think that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that feels so important and so different. I remember being in my undergraduate, and my degree is communication studies with a concentration in interpersonal. The other concentration options were public and organizational. And I kind of have laughed thinking about, okay, well, organization or systems, to use another word we've already used, what is that if not just people and interpersonal relationships? So it feels really important to kind of come at it from both directions, like it seems you are, thinking on the systems level, systems design level, and also taking into account the fact that systems are just a bunch of individual people coming together and what's happening in the space between them, what's being created.
You've really hit on a word that I would love to say a couple of things about, and that is design.
Yeah.
Appreciative inquiry, we have this process called the 4D process. Inquiry to discover the best of what is, dreaming to envision even more, and then designing. What is it that we really, because we're in a world of limited resources, we can't do everything we dream, so let's design. And then the final D is, we call it destiny. Some people say do it, deliver. But this notion of design is so important. And as we look at, for example, the United States right now, we have a lot of people who can tell us what the problem is. Many of us feel it every day.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to get things back to where they were.
Yes.
The key is, what are the conversations we need to have? Who are the people who can design new systems and institutions for us? Because we're in a time where things are being pulled apart. And from my experience organizationally, it is so much easier to destroy than it is to create. And creation is a design process.
Yeah.
We've got to be able to think about our values and design organizations so that our values are inevitable. And that's one of the keys for me.
Yeah.
If we really believe in a world of equality.
Yeah.
Now, that's a big order. But how do we design financial systems? How do we design schools? How do we design all of our institutions so that equality is inevitable? It's not the goal, because you can't get there. You can't get to equality from inequality.
Yeah.
You've got to approximate what you want as you evolve into the future. So this question of design is really an important one, I think, in this day and age right now.
Yeah, it's something that's been front of mind for me. I keep telling all the conferences I'm getting to go to recently, but I got to attend in October a conference that was relating systems thinking and design. And that was really a kind of first introduction to me to systems thinking, systems design world of things, which I just find to be so rich and so meaningful when it's kind of, put hand in hand with a CMM perspective, a communication perspective, a social constructionist perspective. They just, really gel well together. And I got to be a part of a group that put on a workshop, and we used a format that was called the World Cafe. Are you familiar with that?
Sure.
It was my first introduction to the World Cafe, and it was such a meaningful experience because for those who don't know, I'll just go ahead and explain that it's very emergent and open-ended. But the way we did it is we had maybe 5 or 6 tables of 4 people. And we started with a question. And then after so long, you get up and you switch tables, and then you get up and you switch tables again and kind of are creating together the whole time. And then just to juxtapose this a little bit, I was on a Zoom call more recently that was like a 2-hour event. There's maybe a 30-minute chunk of time where we were in breakout rooms. So I was 4 people in my breakout room. And then the last part of the meeting, maybe the whole second hour of the meeting, it felt like there were 8 breakout rooms, and every breakout room had the chance to report back what they'd talked about. And the World Cafe was just so fresh in my mind in this meeting. And I felt like they accomplished similar, or were trying to accomplish similar things in the end, because I understand that as like, you want to leave your meeting, your time together with everybody having a sense of what everybody talked about. But the one way was conversational the whole time. This kind of gets back to that difference between conversation and giving directives, and what that feels like, the difference between those two things. Because I was being reported back to what someone else talked about. And it was clear in their voice that they had a meaningful conversation and ideas were sparked, but it didn't translate that same way to me because I was just being reported back to, rather than in like a World Cafe setting, actually getting to engage with it. So I've been thinking so much about that in terms of design, to get back to the beginning of our conversation. What's the quality of our interactions with each other, and what are we actually creating? And can we look at that? Because I don't think everybody is looking at it or knows how to look at it and make meaning out of it.
Well, Juanita Brown and David are dear friends, and they're also Taos Institute associates.
Yes.
But the distinction you're talking about there, again, is the report back to, or the understanding that we're all in one conversation.
Right.
And when I'm getting reported back to, I don't have a say. I don't get to return in the conversation. There's a different kind of punctuation mark, right? It's like a colon. Here's what you get to hear, but you don't get to say anything. Whereas with something like World Cafe or Open Space or Appreciative Inquiry, the conversation keeps going. Everyone is part of the conversation. And there are a lot of methodologies that are designed to keep everyone in the conversation. Another person I can recommend to you is Steve Cady at Bowling Green University. And he's got this thing called Nexus for Change. And he brings a lot of us together all around different models for change. So yes, yay to World Cafe.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I wanted to, as we're wrapping up, I got to share that story. I wonder if you have any other stories you would want to leave us with about your experiences of really good design that was centered conversation and dialogue, of change processes happening that you've been a part of or facilitated or experienced for yourself. The stories are the most powerful thing to me. So whatever story you kind of want to leave us with today.
Well, it's actually not a story that comes to mind, but it is a phrase that I think is a guiding principle that is a really good one for people. And that is your communication relationship enhancing? Or is it relationship destroying?
Yeah.
And so it's really good to think as you're going to respond to somebody, or you're going to write a letter, or you're going to propose an idea. Is that something that will enhance the relatedness that people have? Because that's what we're all kind of longing for. We talk about loneliness as if it's an individual phenomena, but it really is a relational phenomena. We're disengaged, or we're estranged from the relationships that are so essential to our identity. So I think I leave with that question. Are we being relationship enhancing in the way we talk and in our practices?
Diana, that's a beautiful question to leave people with. I appreciate that. The other thing I like to leave people with is returning to this language within CMM of better social worlds. And I actually won't have us kind of answer this question, but instead offer it to the people who are listening to do that work themselves, of putting this conversation in the context of better social worlds, and answer that question of, how is this a part of creating those? What is that? How are we defining better if this is the process that we're making? So that, I think, is a great thing to leave people with, along with that great question that I think makes this all really tangible and applicable for people, something they can pull from this conversation and use in their own lives. So Diana, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation today. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I think we might have to have a part 2. I feel like there's still so much to explore.
I would love that. This was fabulous. And I love that we just showed up in the same color.
I know.
I mean,
we have to tell people
just,
we look so cute in our purple.
we do. Thank you very much, Abbie.
Thanks, Diana. Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.